All right, so welcome everyone. My name is Miranda Stiers. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I am joining from Nisenan, Miwok, and Maiduland in what is now known as Sacramento. I'm going to put it into the chat where folks can find their information. And it's not working for me, but that's okay. I'll get it in just a moment. Today, we're going to be having our conversation around developing trans-inclusive prevention curricula, and our presenter, Liat Wexler. I'll have them introduce themselves, and then we will get started. Yeah, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. It's so good to be here with you. So as Miranda said, my name is Liat Wexler. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I am on Ohlone land. So I am with UC Berkeley. And my role at the university in our care office is prevention manager for faculty and staff. So I work with academic departments as well as administrative departments on structural changes, as well as doing some individual education and you know, all through the SEM, basically the socio-ecological model. I do that work, but a lot more structural work than historically I've done. So I'm seeing some folks that I do know coming in. It's also good to see some new faces. I'm going to go ahead and read this land acknowledgement. We also have one at UC Berkeley that's a little bit different. Of course, it's more specific to the land that we are occupying. So it says, we acknowledge that we are on traditional territory and homelands of California Native peoples. These nations include over 120 federally recognized tribes and many other non-recognized tribes that are all very culturally diverse. We thank these nations for their generosity, and we keep them in our hearts and thoughts as we are in this space today, this week, and every day. And I actually invite you to go further and to take an action that supports Native sovereignty and financial independence. So for example, I contribute Shumi, which is land tax, locally, and it's an organization that's run by Native women. And so that's one way that I take action monthly. So I contribute every single month. And I invite you to learn more and to take your own actions as well. So by way of introduction, I was invited by Miranda to engage with you all on considering how we can make our curricula, our prevention curricula, more gender inclusive, more trans inclusive, more non-binary inclusive. And as they and I were talking about it, we were considering what is needed, what are sort of the obstacles potentially that folks are running into. So as you're introducing yourselves in the chat, I'd also love to hear you pop out some of those key things that make it really difficult to make curricula inclusive. So what's getting in your way? And in the meantime, I'm just going to take a look and see what folks are saying. So we've got Adriana. This is great. Oh, campus prevention. That's great too. Oh, I'm so excited to see someone from Kuab. Yay. A bunch of people on Ohlone land. This is wonderful. Local. Megan. This is fantastic. So if anyone wants to come off of mute and share verbally, you're also really invited to verbally share anything that's been challenging or getting in your way.
I'll go ahead and start. Actually, my door is open. I'll try to not be too. If you hear something, just ignore it. So I haven't had too much difficulty with the curriculum as much as I have with getting the staff to understand, you know, like trans inclusivity. And my husband happens to be a student at the college that I work at, and they're non-binary and want, you know, their proper pronouns used and everything, and has had to go like to each teacher and like say, these are my pronouns, this is what it is. And it's not just like a, oh, okay, thanks for letting me know. It's, oh, what does that mean, and why, and how, and when, and that, like, it's like I need all the information, and just instead of just like, thanks for the information, okay, let's go. So just from their experience alone, I've realized that like this is where I'm really needed to, because I cover students, staff, and faculty, but I haven't really been able to get into faculty and staff like at all. So that's my difficulty, is to like get them trained on inclusivity and making sure that everyone feels comfortable. And if they have those questions, they can ask me those questions, not have to put students in that uncomfortable situation of having to answer all these questions about themselves.
Well, since I work specifically with faculty and staff on my campus, certainly we can connect more about this later. You know, today I will be focusing more specifically on curriculum, but a big part of that is, you know, getting everybody else on board with the idea that this is something we need and why we're doing it, right? And so, you know, articulating an argument and being able to, you know, influence people, right, is a core part of community organizing. And social justice work, of course, right? So, and that's the challenge. You know, I think that the actual education is the easy part. It's getting people to attend in the first place, and it's getting people to care enough to make use of it, right? So thank you for sharing. Anything else coming up for folks that's been a challenge? I'm seeing in the chat, Megan said, similar to what Adriana is sharing, teachers can be challenging when they aren't well versed or open to learning. Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard. It's hard when we come in with, you know, something that is, you know, challenging the systems and the structures, and the students go, yes, 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 and then they get no support from their community, from their school, from their families. And so we're the only voice, you know, offering that. It can be hard. So that's why I personally believe that, you know, doing individual level interventions, prevention is never going to be enough, right? Yeah, Dominique.
Hey, good morning. So I'm Dominique, I use she and her pronouns. I think we're talking about curriculum in different ways. And so I'm going to approach it as in with our support groups and what we do and the developing there at CUAV. So there's many challenges, as you can imagine. Something that stands out for me right now is how healing specific work and not wanting it to be so fixated on individual actions, but recognizing how important interdependence and collective movement is. But the challenges that happen when we're on Zoom, when we're online, and what doesn't happen when we're in person. So not only that, but also recognizing how important it is to do political education within an hour and a half or 2 hour kind of session. So you're like, no, we're real ambitious, and it's beautiful what we create and do together. But just recognizing some of those challenges that continue to come up.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's collective healing is so critical. And I think we have lost as a movement, this is my personal opinion, I'm not speaking on behalf of the partnership or anybody else, my university, anything. I believe that we've lost a lot since the early days of consciousness raising and, you know, political action as a strategy for healing. I think that the feeling you get when you're in movement with others to create a change in your community is just a completely different experience. And, you know, individual therapy is a powerful tool for a lot of people, and important, and I'm not diminishing that. I think it's not the only form of healing, and we've forgotten that. Anything else that folks want to voice about challenges that you're experiencing with trans inclusivity or engaging your communities in prevention in ways that are gender inclusive? Megan, please.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan, they, them pronouns. I was just thinking about like time, like literally how much time we have, because we go to various, or at least my job as a prevention educator is going to different schools and presenting on a certain topic that the teacher and the school has decided that they want us to speak on. A lot of our curriculum, I am happy to say, is pretty inclusive compared to others I've seen, which is great. But the issue that I was just thinking of is when students and youth have questions because they're noticing that the language is different or there's a certain term or something like that, I don't have time to go in and give them all of the information that they want, as much as I would love to, and sometimes I do, and we kind of go off on a different tangent there. But being kind of restricted to sticking with whatever curriculum, whatever slides we're supposed to be doing, that's been kind of challenging.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think that's something that we might be able to address a little bit. And what I would offer is, from my experience, you know, of 20 years doing this, I go where the room needs me to go, and I try to let go of my own agenda. You know, of course, I'm going to have a few key learning objectives, right, in the back of my head, but as long as the work that's being done in the room is engaged in changing gender norms and shifting, you know, attitudes, I don't care, right? So if it means that we're becoming more trans inclusive, that's changing gender norms, right? That's shifting the culture in the ways that that will prevent violence. And so if that's where the room wants to go, that's where I tend to go. And I find that people, if they're getting their questions answered, you know, then they're more receptive to hearing anything else that needs to happen in the room. And so, you know, again, with balance, right? We don't want, you know, one person taking over the entire time or space for everybody else, but, you know, facilitating a space that people get to actually have their needs met is more valuable, in my opinion, than teaching a curriculum, you know. And I wouldn't be surprised if most of you agree with me, but I think sometimes we feel the pressure to, you know, to deliver what we've been told to deliver, what we've been asked to come in and do, and that can be that can feel like a tension. And I invite you to let go of that tension and just say, I know I'm doing my work. I know that the work of changing culture is happening. So, you know, we may all be coming in with different needs, certainly for the folks who have spoken and written in the chat. You know, there's lots of different things going on. I'm not going to be able to address everything that's coming up today. I won't be able to, you know, to help you think through every single one of those issues, but hopefully as we go, some of those questions can be teased out and we can come back to some of that. As a starting place, you know, certainly there are folks who I can see your pronouns are they, them. You come from organizations that are centering queer folks, but not everybody is. And so we're going to do a quick kind of self-awareness poll using the Zoom poll feature. So I invite you, it's anonymous, of course, so I invite you to be honest. And Miranda, would you be able to go ahead and share this poll for us so that we can explore, you know, where we really are in terms of our own engagement with queer and trans communities.
All right, so the first poll is up.
The question is, have you been called out for using the wrong pronouns in the last 3 months? And by called out, that can be a gentle, someone reminding you, right? We're not necessarily saying a confrontational experience. Okay. We still have a moment. If there's folks, I see not everybody has answered. There are folks who would like to answer. Some of that may be our facilitation staff. All right, so let's see those results. Okay, so it seems like a good number of us are, at least in the last 3 months, succeeding. If we've had an opportunity to engage with folks whose pronouns are maybe unexpected or different from the standard. And a couple of us, you know, definitely have challenged with that. Thanks. So let's ask another question. This one says, how many trans or non-binary resources do you regularly consume? And by that, I mean media content, you know, sort of regular blogs or vlogs or Insta accounts, you know, basically, are you getting content that's been created by and for trans people? And by regularly, I mean that you're probably looking at it every week at least. All right. So we've got a range. A few of us, not surprisingly, are in the 6+ range, right? Because that's maybe our world and our community. And for others of us, maybe we're dipping our toes, but we haven't quite become immersed yet. All right, we have more questions. So this one says, do you know the queer and trans specific organizations and or leaders in your community? And that doesn't have to be leaders who have official power. It can also include individuals who are influential within the community and trusted by the community, but who don't necessarily hold power and title.
Part of me feels bad that Alex is this denial.
Encourage folks to mute themselves.
Part of me is kind of like, that's Murphy's Law, you know?
All right, so let's take a look at these results. So quite a few of you do, in fact, know that those folks in your community or those organizations, and that's encouraging. And then for some of us, there's some work to do to get out there and to connect and figure out who they are and have, you know, deepen some of those relationships. All right. So our next question says, how many trans related events have you or your organization shown up for in the last year? And I realize, given the pandemic, shown up means virtually, I hope, for everybody's sake. Unless, of course, this is, you know, a private event amongst friends, potentially. All right, thank you. I know, I have not shown up to 6 events the entire year, I will say, so I can't even, you know, like, it doesn't have to be trans related. I just haven't shown up for anything, to be fair. So virtually really changes your answers, Ruby. Yes, I feel you. It's a different world, right? Thank you though. All right. Let's go on to the next question. So then we've got which month is Trans Awareness Week? January, June, November, or unsure. Okay. We have about half of you have responded, so it's okay to say unsure. It's okay to take a wild guess. All right. So let's see the answers. So those of you who said November were correct. And for those who didn't know, this is an opportunity to consider, not just, Pride, which is broadly for the LGBTQIA plus community, but really, what are the events and the opportunities that are specific to trans people. And so, yes, it is in November. And for those who don't know, there's also Trans Day of Mourning, which is November 20th every single year, where we honor the lives of trans people who have been killed or have died as a result of gender, basically transphobic violence, even if somebody wasn't trans. But Trans Awareness Week is an opportunity for learning, for celebration, for visibility, rather than only mourning. So I think we have more questions. Okay, so this one says, does your organization have queer and trans inclusive materials? Excuse me, so that means handouts. Does the website do more than just have like a trans flag on it, but actually use language that's inclusive? It might be other kinds of materials. It might be healing content. Okay. I think we have time to hear from the last few folks. You might not be sure, so it might be valuable to look into this if you aren't sure about where your organization stands. Most of you are saying yes. I'm guessing that for most of you, your organization's content is mixed. So there are elements that are inclusive and elements that are not. And our goal, obviously would be to work towards having every aspect of the organization, be inclusive. So good. And this question says, how many queer and or trans people do you count as friends or colleagues? And when I say colleagues, I mean people you would actually have lunch with or coffee with, beyond just collaboration for work, right? So who do you count as part of your world? I'm picturing people literally cycling through their folks counting right now. That's what I'm seeing in my head. Oh, poll was closed. Whoops. Let's reopen that poll.
Showing, I'll reopen, yeah, because it was showing it's open on my end. Sorry about that, folks. Yep. Stop sharing. Let me do this again.
There we go.
Okay. Okay. Are folks able to answer? Okay, perfect.
Okay. So not surprisingly, again, for some of us, this may be our community. And so, our whole world, we might have some token cisgender straight people in our close world, but for others of us, it's the reverse is true, right? We may only have one or two, trans folks in it. So I want to, acknowledge this because we're really coming from different places, and that's a fantastic thing for this particular training because we have a lot of expertise in the room, which is exciting. And so, I think it's important that we, kind of get ourselves kind of in a place of intention and awareness. Let's do one more question, I think. So this one is, how many in-services, meaning sort of trainings, internal trainings for your organization, have included and or been facilitated by queer and trans people? And maybe, let's say, in the last year.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
Is it in services that you've offered or that you've received?
Oh, that your organization has had, that has been received within the organization. So it doesn't have to be, am I answering your question? So what I'm saying is that training for the staff.
Got it. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay, so again, for at least one of us, that is maybe the fundamental way that we receive our training, and for others, right, we might be lucky if we're getting one, training that it has been facilitated by someone who's queer or trans. And Megan says, curious how many of those were during Pride Month. Does anybody want to share? Yeah, that is a good question. I think I often get a lot of training requests, right, like starting in June. Like I won't even get the request in advance. It'll be a very last minute thing where folks will say, oh my gosh, we haven't thought of anything for, Pride Month. We should probably do something. Let's call Liat up. And it's really telling that it comes at the last minute. It's really telling that it's only during June, and that we're not seeing it all year round, right? Not cool. I agree. It's also disrespectful of my time, right? To ask me at the last minute in a very busy month when I also want to be celebrating my community and want to take time off. That's my personal holiday, right? Like, I don't really care about, Christmas. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for answering these poll questions. Just as a quick check-in, what's it like reflecting in this way? Kind of thinking about these questions. What does it tell you about yourself, about your organization? Thanks, Miranda. Yes, you're welcome to unmute or type.
It is definitely not surprising at all for where we are, what our organization, doesn't do. We are the prevention ed department is trying to push it into that direction, but it's more like we're the redheaded stepchild of the whole organization, so we're very, very last on everything.
Oh my gosh, raise your hand as a Zoom React if that's true for you. If the prevention ed department is the social justice group and everybody, you feel like you're dragging everybody along behind you. Does that resonate with others? I'm seeing nods from some folks. I'm seeing some thumbs up. Yep. Raised hands. Yep. That was true before when I worked at a community-based org. Agree. Yeah, Kimmy, same for you. Less true now, I will say. That's UC Berkeley, our office is incredibly social justice oriented. So I'm excited that Kimmy, you're experiencing that as well. And that's the reality of the circumstances, right? A lot of people who work in intervention, come from a much more traditional place, and traditional, I mean, from the last 20, 30 years, but not before, where it was a lot more radical. So yeah, sometimes we're running uphill. Thanks, Kate Bush. All right, so, is there anything else that has come up from doing this sort of self-awareness poll that that's useful or valuable to you? Adriana said, I get told that they don't want to make things political. That's cute. Nothing we do is political at all. All right. So I just invite you, if you or your organization were sort of answering in ways that suggest that there's more work to be done, that these are tools for us to start kind of gauging, our progress. It can be kind of a scale for ourselves. Where am I? How much media am I consuming? How well am I doing personally on pronouns? How well are my colleagues doing on pronouns, right? And that, when I do organizational consulting, I actually have a self-assessment for the organization to complete that has stuff like this. And so if you're interested in that kind of work, let me know, and I might just share that tool with you. I don't know if I have time to do that level of consulting anymore, but certainly I might, I'd be willing to share stuff like that with you. Jane, you're saying you're a consultant for a handful of nonprofit agencies, and you'll share that they all want to be inclusive and incorporate inclusive language and practices, but they're not there yet, or they're working on it. Okay, so that's encouraging, right? I love hearing that. Sometimes my experience is that folks are saying, yes, we want to be there, but they aren't really willing to do the work that it takes. They want someone to hand them an easy solution. They want a training because they think that the training is what's going to make the change. What I find personally is that the structural change has to happen first, and then the training accompanies that. The training bolsters and supports structural change, not the other way around. I find that if your practices, if your policies, if your day-to-day, like how you run the meetings and what you put in email signatures and whether or not people introduce themselves with pronouns, if that isn't instituted as a practice first, and we train people to do something that's already kind of structurally set in, a training alone does almost nothing, in my experience. So I just invite us, if we're doing the work of consulting, to consider reversing how we do our work a little bit, if that's something that you're coming up against. All right, so let's, what we're gonna do going forward is actually work out of a shared Google Doc. I like doing this because it helps to capture all of our responses and ideas and information in a way that we can then continue to refer back to and for other people to learn from. So I will share the link in the chat. What I'm going to ask is that you go ahead and enter that document. And from now on, instead of using the Zoom chat, there's an area for us to basically write like general chat comments, questions, so on. So if you have responses, let's put it there and use that as our working doc. All right. And I'll briefly, I will share the screens to make sure that we're all in the same place, and that we're all looking at it. So it should look like this. It says developing trans inclusive prevention curriculum, shared working doc. Okay. And you'll notice up at the top, I have the agenda. It's actually, if you click on any one of the sections, it's hyperlinked. And so you can go straight over to a different section rather than scrolling if you prefer to. And so we're going to work through this. It's almost like a worksheet. And so here you'll see sort of this area for general chat and comments. We're just going to keep a running space for that. It'll be sort of our parking lot, as well as reactions and comments to what we're doing, if there isn't another place within the document to write that. In some cases, I'm asking specific questions. So our learning objectives today, what I'm coming in with to offer is that we're going to identify strategies to become more engaged with trans, non-binary, and agender communities. We'll identify elements of trans-specific and trans-centered curricula. So what does that really mean? I find sometimes people say that they want to shift their materials, but they don't know what that actually might look like. They have no example to refer to. And then to adapt from. So that's what we're going to do today. And then you'll work on developing an example of trans inclusive content. You may also use that time collaboratively to think through some of the other challenges and questions that have come up when we started today. All right. So here, let me stop sharing real quick. All right. Is anybody having trouble getting into the document, or are we all good? I think we're all good. Let us know if you are having trouble for any reason. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is actually model a piece of curriculum that I would do for a trans audience. So it's by a trans person for trans people. And, you know, I wanted to offer this because I think so frequently, if we aren't ourselves part of a community, we really don't ever get the nuanced experience of what it's like to be sitting in a room where it's by and for that community. So actually, that's one of the reasons why in the poll questions, I asked about how many you know, resources and content do you consume regularly that are from the trans community or for the trans community, because the more we have, if you have 10, 20, 50 regular sources of content that are for communities that are not yours, you are going to be a lot more versed in how that community talks to each other. And that's a really important part when we say something is identity centered or identity specific. Right, we're talking about how does a community talk to itself, and how is it addressing its own needs first and foremost. And so we want to start from that place. Whenever I talk to folks about adapting and creating programming or curricular material that is centered on a particular community, you first really need to immerse yourself in it, and you need to be working collaboratively with that community. You need to start with where they are, and then take your material and shift it so that it's appropriate maybe for other people beyond that community, but you have to start with them first. So I have a little activity that is probably very similar to activities you all have done at various times as educators. It is, you know, a pretty standard healthy relationships type of activity. So I'm going to introduce it the way I would. I'm going to pretend that you're a group of, you know, trans folks that I might be doing healthy curricula with. And so I'm going to ask that you actually engage as if you were you don't have to pretend to be trans. Feel free to make a note in that sort of general chat and comment question area about terms or concepts or things that you are not familiar with. I may not pause to answer those questions, but I want you to make note of anything that is culturally specific that you don't understand, because that's going to be work for you to do. All right, so hi, I'm Liat, right? I've already done my introduction. We're jumping into this, and I might introduce the activity by saying, you know, in our communities, we generally don't get modeled, you know, healthy relationships, healthy boundaries, you know, good communication. We don't get a chance to see that either, you know, from our families of origin, especially if we've been really isolated in our families, but also even within our queer fam. I think that that's something we don't get to see very much. There's a lot of unhealthy stuff that goes on. And it can be really confusing to know what's healthy or not. So we're going to do an activity exploring some of those, you know, types of relationship behaviors, and collectively we're going to have a conversation judging, you know, what's healthy and what's not. And so we're going to use our Zoom React buttons to vote on each statement. So I'll read a statement of an example of a behavior, and then you get to decide how healthy you think it is. So if you think it's healthy, if you think it's a positive behavior, you'll react with a heart. If you think it might be sort of problematic, I want you to clap back, okay? Be like, I don't know about that, all right? And then if it seems abusive, I want you to use the surprise face, like, oh no, okay? So any questions before we get started? All right.
Yeah, sorry. A couple of folks are messaging they're not able to edit the document.
Oh, let me see what's going on there. Thank you. Oh, that's because I have it as view and not edit. Oops, sorry. There we go. Try refreshing now. Thank you for alerting me. Everybody got it. Okay, perfect. Sweet. Gorgeous. All right, so I'll read these out. The first statement is, ever since I started T, my boyfriend and I look like a gay couple when we go out. Now he won't hold my hand or be affectionate in public. So what kind of reaction? Do you think it's healthy, potentially problematic, or seems abusive? So I see a clap back from Jessica, from Sarah, Hasmik, Celia. Okay, so a number of clapbacks, a surprise face. Okay. All right. It's okay if you don't know. If you just have your own sense of this is your personal experience, boundaries, sense of what feels okay or not okay. So B, my partner's parents never get my pronouns right, and my partner doesn't correct them, even though we go over there at least once a month. I think she doesn't want to create more conflict, but I feel really uncomfortable. So we've got some seems abusive. We've got some potentially problematic. Nobody's saying this is healthy. Okay. All right, so we've got a mixed reaction. And if I were normally doing this curriculum, this is sort of my like breaking the fourth wall. If normally I were doing this, right, we would get into and talk about why. And Jessica saying, I feel like the potentially problematic is not even potentially, but definitely is. All right, and I encourage you to remember to put that not in the Zoom chat, but in the shared doc, because I think those comments are great to capture in perpetuity. All right, and you can be specific about a particular item. So if there's one that you're like, oh no, you know, have your reaction, put those comments in, go to town. All right. So C says, I'm not sure if I want to change my name for me or because I'm just so tired of teachers misgendering me when they read it on the roster. Is it really dysphoria if it's to change other people's perceptions? I don't know. My boyfriend said he'd be willing to help by using new names for me so I can see if any of them feel right. Oh, repeat, please. Okay, and you can also read along with me because it's on the shared doc. So it says, I'm not sure, this is number C or letter C. I'm not sure if I want to change my name for me Or because I'm just so tired of teachers misgendering me when they read it on the roster? Is it really dysphoria if it's to change other people's perceptions? My boyfriend said he'd be willing to help by using new names for me, so I can see if any of them feel right. So I had seen kind of a mix of responses before. I had seen some hearts. I saw a surprised face. And I'm sort of interested to know if the surprise, if the seems abusive reaction was, if that holds up on the rereading. Or if somebody wants to share their thoughts about it. D, my partner gets pissed and says it's because I'm hanging out with my new T-word friends and don't love her anymore. When I told her I thought she was being too jealous, she said she has a right to feel hurt, that I sprung this gender stuff on her, and that it was abusive of me not to ask her first before coming out. Okay, so a little bit of a mix, but a little more consensus on the like, this seems abusive. All right, E, my boyfriend still refers to my body using terms that reflect the sex I was assigned at birth. I just don't like it when he calls it my ass. I asked him to call it a pussy and he did that one time, but he hasn't done it since. Okay, so here we have a mix as well. Okay. F is my girlfriend IDs as a lesbian, and we met before I came out as agender. She's been reflecting on her sexual orientation and what language she's using in order to honor both her own identity as well as mine. She's not sure yet what the right word is, but she's willing to explore it. Yeah, lots of hearts. Don't we all wish that were true for us in our relationships? All right, G. My man gets frustrated that ever since I started moans, I can't get as hard. He wants me to peg him, but I hate feeling like I have to top because it seems like he doesn't see me as a woman. And again, if there's ideas, concepts that are culturally specific that are unfamiliar to you, it might be great to note that in the comments area. Or feel free to, you could highlight it directly in the document if you wanted to like highlight in yellow or something like that on the question itself. H says, I found out my partner got access to my records because they impersonated me and the company rep wasn't suspicious because we both have a low voice. Yeah, so lots of seems abusive. I is when we have sex, my partner keeps on cupping my chest in a really feminizing way. It makes me really uncomfortable and I freeze up every time. I don't want top surgery, just to be treated in a gender neutral way. So a little bit of a mix here. Okay. The next one is K. Me and my wife are both trans. She's constantly telling me, she constantly tells me I should do more to pass and gets mad when I don't let her help me get dressed or beat my face. It makes me feel like I'm not enough for her and I'll never be respected as a woman. Okay, also a mix. And then the final one, or no, I'm sorry, second to last. My partner encouraged me to join an online group for trans pregnancy because we want to have kids, and I don't know anyone else going through this process. Yeah. It's pretty cool. Elle says, when we had a fight, my joy friend mutilated my packer, which I saved up for a month to buy, and ripped my favorite button-down shirt. All right. Seems abusive. Thanks, y'all. Okay. And let me just scroll up and make sure I didn't miss a comment. So somebody said, I feel like a lot of the problematic ones can be abusive if it goes a bit further. I would offer also if it's a pattern. So not necessarily that one behavior, but if there's multiple behaviors that are kind of demonstrating a pattern of control. Yeah, absolutely. Right. So it's not necessarily about the level of severity as much as it is like, what's the context, what's the intent, and what's the effect of the behavior. Right. And if you're not familiar with that model, the Northwest Network teaches that sort of way of assessing how to determine when something is an abusive relationship dynamic. And who is the party who's being abusive in that dynamic. So I recommend getting trained in that if your organization isn't already, or if correctly assessing the abusive partner is not part of the regular practice of your organization, it probably should be. And by further, I did mean either a pattern or additional abusive acts. Yeah, for sure. Communication between partners or lack thereof is a key factor in a lot of these. Yeah, right. And there could be a lot of reasons for why that communication may or may not be good, right? And so again, there's a lot of times where something can be unhealthy because people don't have great relationship skills or communication skills. It doesn't necessarily indicate that it's a pattern of power and control, right? Because the context, intent and effect of it don't result in a power dynamic. But, two people can come in with like just not a lot of great healthy skills on hand and struggle, and that's real. And then I'm seeing another person typing. Oh, Lydia, let's see, what did you link for us? Yes, the assessment tool overview. That's awesome. Thank you so much for linking that. I think it's a really powerful model that I have used. I also learned, so I started my work with the network Led Ed in Massachusetts 20 years ago. And so we had our own, assessment tool that was very similar, that was developed, at the same time in a slightly different way. But yeah, it essentially has the same concept. Okay, so I'm seeing somebody wrote, it gets really complicated when families get involved. Different levels of trauma could be involved. Absolutely, right? That's a reality, is especially when you have two people who are marginalized in the same or in different ways, right? We know that that's a reality. And it doesn't mean that someone who is marginalized can't be abusive, right? And so it's important that we don't miss the fact that just because somebody experiences oppression, doesn't mean that they can't also turn around and use power and control as a way to dominate the relationship. A couple of these examples also highlighted an adjusted period or learning curve when one partner transitions. Yes, right. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's abuse. It does mean that there's a need for a lot of respect and care and understanding, right? Okay, so if I were working with a trans population, I might wrap up by saying stuff like, you may have noticed that in some of the examples I shared, the person causing harm was also transgender. Because we experience a lot of pain at the hands of cis folks, we might miss the signs when people in our own community are behaving abusively. People of any gender can be abusive, just like people of all genders can be survivors. I might also point out that, we have to clarify that not everything that's unhealthy in our relationships is a result of being trans, non-binary, or agender, right? Or queer. Sometimes it's about other aspects of our experience or our identities. So that could be, race or age or ethnicity, immigration status, our size, socioeconomic status, right? Disability. I wanted to share these specific examples because in the usual workshops that we receive, we don't usually talk about our experiences, right? That doesn't usually get highlighted. And so we might not be able to recognize that what's happening to us is also potentially a problem. And so next, if I had more time with you all, we might talk about identifying and setting boundaries, such as when does it feel like the right time to tell someone that you've just started dating that you're trans? And so that might be what I offer to a trans-specific community, right? That's going to look and sound really different, obviously, than what you've been offering or what you've done in the past, unless you're working in a trans-specific context. So there, if we scroll down, there's two debrief questions for us to explore together after seeing that modeled. The first one is, in what ways does this trans-specific curriculum differ from what you've seen in your kind of typical gender inclusive material? So you can type right there into that debrief section. You can verbalize, and we can, we can take notes. We're happy to capture the ideas. I'd love if people want to unmute and share. I think that's also a great way to connect with each other. There's lots of typing, so let's let people get their thoughts out. And it's okay if we have comments that are the same, right? If multiple people respond with similar ideas, it's totally okay. All right, so I'll read some of these out. It doesn't just change pronouns and leave everything else the same. Correct. That's very intentional. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that we make when we're trying to adapt material that was not made for trans people to try to be gender inclusive, right? And we think that if we just shift the pronouns, that we can magically make it relevant to trans people. I'm wondering if sicarios, I'm not sure, that's a term I'm not familiar with, and I'm wondering if that's a misspelling or if it has a meaning that I don't know about. Scenarios, got it. I hadn't used scenarios as questions to a group, but rather as reflections. I like this, okay. It shows the nuance between intimate and familial relationships, diverse gender identities, how to navigate the outside world's perspective. Yeah, so much of the tensions that trans folks might feel in their day-to-day life, and that might show up, in their relationships with intimate partners, are about that interaction with the outside world. I appreciate how specific the examples were. I think because of our team's lack of experience with the trans community, we often struggle to find relevant examples to share with our audience. Specific terminology, yep. Being real, yeah, using real language, not sugarcoating things. I guess I'm thinking more of the real sounding scenarios in this discussion, yeah. Speaking of that, were there any terms, any culturally specific things that I should go over and make sure that you all understand that you're not familiar with? And it's really okay to admit that you don't know. This is a space for learning. And of course, you can also type it. yeah, I very specifically included stuff that represents, not just my own experiences or my friends' experiences as white, mostly, passing, as binary, trans person who's non-binary, but I seem binary to others, right? I try to get into, the experiences of lots of other folks that I've talked with or who are my friends and whose genders are wildly different than mine, because, the language, the experiences, the specifics are going to be really different. And so when we talk about having something be community specific, it's also about thinking about, what's it like for a Black trans woman or for an agender person who's Latinx, right? Like, I feel like if we're not thinking about how race integrates with it, if we're not thinking about how ability might integrate with it, and all those other identities, even if we're talking about gender specifically, we're really missing what it means to be culturally specific, because my little bubble of friends is not representative of the trans community as a whole. I'm friends with all therapists, as it turns out. I need more friends. All right, so I'm not seeing any questions, so that's totally fair. And if you want to look these up in the future or ask later, I very much encourage you to do that. The other thing I'll highlight is that I had created back when I was in San Diego, I had created a power and control wheel. And I'm going to share the screen real quick. This was linked when we were, when you got the invite to the primer materials. And this has a lot of very specific examples. And I did it that way on purpose, because I really wanted it to not become another generic wheel that focuses, that has a lot of overlap with the types of tactics of power and control that we might see in cishet relationships, even though a lot of those tactics are absolutely used in queer and trans relationships, right? Like, there's no question that, isolation and, victim blaming, all those things, and all those kind of generic ways in which it happens, but just calling somebody stupid or, that kind of stuff. I mean, that's real too, right? But the purpose for me of creating the wheel with hyper-specific examples was so that the communities could see when the dynamics are different for us. And so a lot of the examples I used were kind of spinning off of things in this power and control wheel. Okay. So if you haven't perused it closely, it has some culturally specific language in there as well. Okay, so let's take a look. Our next debrief question is, what would it look like to move from trans-specific to a trans-centered curriculum? So now we're sort of shifting into a slightly different way of thinking about things. How do we take that example that I modeled and turn it into something that becomes the basis or the core for what you might do with a broader audience? And maybe even, what does it mean to you when we say trans-centered? One person wrote, not just including trans materials into other handouts, but having specific ones. So yeah, I think sometimes offering content that is trans specific to everyone, right? Not just to trans people, but at the very least making it available so that anybody who wants that can get it. creating organizations that are safe enough for trans folks to work at. So curricula and education can be for the community, by the community. Absolutely. I would say that short of being able to get our organizations to hire more trans folks and queer folks, you know, we want to be thinking about how do we collaborate with the communities in the creation of our materials as well. So if I'm the only person at my organization that's willing to go and do that work, okay, let me go and do it in collaboration with community members. And again, if anyone wants to come off mute, share verbally, thoughts coming into your head, moving from trans-specific to something that's trans-centered. So we've got, you know, getting the org to collaborate with other orgs that isn't just one training once every 2 years is difficult. Yes, it is. And that's something that, you know, I think we have to really kind of challenge our leadership on their commitment. Right? Are we in line with our mission if we only do this once every 2 years? Are we doing what we said we were going to do, you know, follow through on the commitment we said we were going to make to our communities? Maybe we've even identified queer and trans communities as an underserved population, and we've articulated in our strategic planning or in our, you know, programming that this is a community we want to serve. Well, you know, is this an appropriate way of serving? Pay those you are collaborating with in supporting the shift. Very, very important. Very, very important. Unless you have an MOU between organizations where you're going to do like a, you know, a skill share or cross training or some other kind of, you know, trade, then yeah, you gotta pay. You gotta pay somehow, whether it's in skill, time, resources. They hardly recognize the queer folks working here, let alone clients or students. Yeah. So, you know, I know that for those of us who care a lot about this and who are within an organization that feels less friendly, maybe even hostile, it can feel really challenging. And I'll be honest with you, I have left organizations because of it. I mean, sometimes we just hit our limit in terms of, you know, I have tried to make change from the inside and I can no longer do that. So now I'll go in somewhere else and make that change. And I think that that's a fair thing to do, especially when it's a collective action and it's very clear and communicated to leadership that that's what's happening, right? Is we're all leaving because you won't support this work. And this is the consequence of your choices, right? I think that, you know, I do believe in you know, trying to create change from within as much as you can. And when that doesn't create a change, then it's worth, you know, pointing that out to leadership and making that public. Again, that's a lot of privilege for me, being able to move into a different job or being able to shift gears and have options. And I recognize that. I do think that there's also power in unionizing or other kind of collective action that can happen while you stay on the job. And so I welcome if anyone wants to come off mute and talk a little bit more about, you know, that challenge. I'm happy to hold space for a moment.
Sometimes it's about having those folks in the organization who really understand and kind of building that critical mass. When trying to make changes at a local program, I was getting a lot of pushback with like, of course we're inclusive. Look, we have queer leadership. And I'm like, we have queer, cis, lesbian, white women. That's not diversity in what we're talking about. Like that's one demographic. Like all of our documents and the pushback a lot of times was like, we can't afford the cost of changing blah, 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 blah. And then pointing out like, here's the cost of what it is to our community to not serve us, which helped to make that shift.
Yeah, and I think there's, so especially when you can capture sort of the experiences of the communities you're serving and say, yeah, we see through your fake diversity, right? And we don't feel included. I think that that's powerful. And if you have a strategic planning, period coming up where there's an opportunity to sort of engage with stakeholders, that's a great time. If you can get on that committee, the strategic planning committee, or be involved in, what gets asked and to whom, that's a great time to capture some of that feedback and help an organization shift priorities. If they're polling, the staff as stakeholders, make sure that you work with your colleagues to coordinate comments, right? So that it raises it up to a level where people pay attention. It's not just one comment, but it's a collective group of people saying this is an issue. So yeah, there's opportunities internally for sure. Any other thoughts about shifting or, from trans-specific to trans-centered curricula or programming? I think the main thing that I'll say is that when we start with, the most marginalized experiences and communities, and I try to imagine, a room full of people who have multiple marginalizations, right? I try to imagine a room full of people who have disabilities that are visible and invisible, who have experiences with ICE, who have, whose relationships are queer as hell, whose identities I don't understand, right? I try to imagine a room full of people whose lives are maybe like mine in some ways or completely different from mine. If I start there and I center those folks' needs, and I think about what are the specific things that those folks need to hear, then when I go into any other space, I know that the people in that space who have those identities or experiences are going to have their needs met. And I know that everybody else will also have their needs met, right? Because what's true for folks who are marginalized is more applicable when we stretch out than the other way in. I hope that made sense, right? So if we start with centering the margins, it's going to be more applicable to the people who are, who are at the center, most of the time, than if we start with the people who are always being centered already and try to go out to the margins. Okay. And from there, if we then tweak it to be like, okay, so then what would a cis het white, person need to know? I think it's a lot easier to sort of throw, like, if we think about how we, throw in the, like, the odd, neutral pronoun or be like, okay, this one's going to be two men together, right? In our examples in the standard inclusive curriculum, if you flip that, if you start with queer and trans-centered material, and then you sort of throw in one or two straight kind of cis examples or ways of framing, I think that, we flip it on its head and it's still going to be relevant, but the folks who need to hear the message the most are going to get it. All right, so what we're going to do next, we're going to take a big chunk of time to go out into breakout rooms. And this will allow you to kind of dig in smaller groups, talking with each other and strategizing together. And these are going to be the breakout rooms of your choice. So we're going to do 2 rounds. We're going to have about 15 minutes in the first round, and then maybe about 10 minutes for round 2. Your choice of breakout rooms are, the first one will be like consent and communication. So maybe it's material or strategizing around, how to, present that kind of content in a way that's inclusive and centering trans folks. Bystander intervention is another one. Healthy relationships, conflict and boundaries as content, right? And then we have a group that is about navigating pushback. It could also be about like navigating internal, like it could be pushback from communities or it could be pushback internally from your organization. What I'm going to say is that I'm going to ask you to switch rooms. If you are in the navigating pushback room, I definitely want you to switch rooms when we call time to switch, because if we spend too much time there, kind of circling around that issue, it sort of ends up just consuming all of our energy. And I think that we actually have navigated pushback. If we are activists, if we have been doing prevention or social justice work for any length of time, we have been navigating pushback all our lives. We know how to do this. It just can feel frustrating when it's coming internally, and I get that. So let's be strategic. Let's use that space or time to think strategically, and then move on and think about the rest of what we need to do. But if you're in one of the other rooms and you want to stay in that room to dig even deeper, you can do that as well. So you'll have the opportunity to move or to stay for any of the other rooms. So what you'll see in the shared working doc is that there are, so there's a debrief on that page where I have the instructions for the breakout rooms. We'll do that afterwards. So don't worry about that now. But if you scroll down, you'll see that each room will have some prompts. It'll have its own page to take notes on. And so collectively, if you can capture your ideas, maybe see if there's one person who's willing to note take, and then, you don't have to use the prompts, you can. It's just, you don't have to answer all of them. It's really just a way to get you beginning and thinking. Okay. What questions do you have before we break out? All right. So let's go ahead. And I believe that what we're going to do is you should be able to see the breakout room options and click to join the one that you want.
Are the options showing for everyone? Okay, perfect.
And I know that there might be some people who are saying, that they don't want to join rooms, and that's also okay. And if you have questions or things you'd like to chat about here in the main room, I'd be happy to chat with folks. If there's anything you want to mull over. And Miranda, I think we could probably stop recording or pause recording. I'm excited because I was kind of, flipping through some of the comments that I saw you all capturing, the notes, and yeah, there's a lot of good ideas that you're raising up in there. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit and kind of debrief what happened in those rooms, because obviously I wasn't in there with you. I just let y'all roll, and we have a good mix of folks who are from varying levels of knowledge. So I'm hoping that the rooms allowed folks with a lot of knowledge to also sort of share that. So I'm wondering, you know, what were some of, and if we could just verbalize, because I think that's a really powerful way, and maybe, I don't know, Miranda, if you have the capacity to take notes, if you'd be open and willing to do that, that would be awesome. Thank you so much. I'd love for people to come off mute and just kind of really, you know, person to person, share on a personal level, what were some of the insights or the ahas or the things that kind of came up in the rooms that really were new for you, or that really kind of resonated deeply, or sparked an idea for you? So I'm wondering if the silence is because people don't want to come off mute, or because you're not wanting to share verbally or otherwise, or there's nothing to share.
I guess I'll try to go. It was just Jessica and I in the room, so we finished a little bit earlier. But she, I think you said she, right? Okay. Was talking about feminine and masculine touch. And I hadn't like thought about that, because I don't think of like touch at all when it comes to being in these kind of spaces. Like I like kind of a hands-off like thing to me. But thinking about the fact that like my trans man friends, I would never like put my hand out to help them do something, like to like help pull them up or something like that, do certain things that I think would be kind of a little bit more something that people do for feminine folks. Not exactly like, I mean, to me, everything's kind of like, you can do anything for anybody kind of thing. But at the same time, I don't want them to feel uncomfortable with that. And I know with one friend, I know specifically, he would just look at me like, what the hell are you doing? Like, why are you doing that? I don't need that, you know? And so like having those intentions and like awareness, that I thought that was a great point to put out there.
I love that. And I think that that's, you know, a lot of times when I try to do sort of like trans 101 trainings, I try to talk about like misgendering isn't just using the wrong pronouns or saying the wrong gender for someone, right? It goes into the subtle ways that we interact where there's gendered behavior. And so I talk about like, how do you greet someone? And how much that changes based on how you perceive someone's gender, right? The type of hug, like, right? Is it the cross hug, or is it the around the top of the shoulders, or is it around the waist, right? Is it a hug where you are leaving a lot of space in your body, or that you're right up close with someone? And sometimes that's familiarity, but a lot of times that's very gendered, right? The behaviors that we have around courtesy and what we expect or don't expect, you know, I mean, so many things are so gendered, and we until we investigate how gender shows up in our daily behaviors, we miss it, right? Because it's so integrated already. So that's a really great point, is that touch. And you know, I'm always careful about the word feminine and masculine, because it sounds very essentialist, right? Like, this is that kind of touch, right? And you're saying like, whatever, you know, but you wouldn't do this kind of behavior because you know someone would react negatively because it's not affirming of their identity. But the touch itself isn't fundamentally feminine or masculine, right? It's just been gender normed that way. And so I try to make that clear when I'm talking about it, right? That's what I mean. And then Jessica, you put in the chat that you're also talking about intimate partner touch. Yeah, sexual touch, romantic touch, absolutely, right? And so that shows up in those ways. The scenarios made you think about how couples can express their wants and needs. Yeah. So one of the biggest lessons that I think comes out of doing work in queer and trans communities, especially kinky and polyamorous communities, is how much those communities rely on explicit negotiation for lots of behaviors, and that there isn't a script around what is a romantic relationship supposed to be and look like, how is a sexual relationship supposed to progress, what does it mean to be committed to someone, right? All of those things are up for negotiation between people who are able to consent to those things. And I think that if there's one lesson from centering, queer, trans, poly, and kinky communities, it's that there's behaviors that we really wish a lot of people would be doing that would be a lot healthier in general, right? And we can
I feel like that community is like the most healthy, except for the imposters or people who try to hide their abuse by hiding in a community.
I would offer that there's unhealthy aspects to all communities. Just because a community has learned strategic skills and ways of navigating that are outside of the norm because they've had to, because there hasn't been a script or there hasn't been support, doesn't mean that it's always healthy or that all individuals are healthy, right? But I would say that there's healthy strategies that we can learn from each other.
Can I piggyback on that really quick? I belong to the leather community. So I don't think it's not just kinky, that there's a different layer to it. And whenever there are any kind of abuses or anything that is happening, what I appreciate from the community is that they call out and they call in and have these conversations. Well, they try to call in and then they call out. But we hold each other accountable, and that's like one of the highest parts, the biggest things about it. So I really love that aspect of it.
And I would say that really varies from geographic community to geographic community, right? So like I've been involved in, not leather, but like kink communities in various cities that are not healthy at all and do not call it out and support abusive people and, shut survivors down. So it's, just because the stated norms of a community might be different, doesn't mean that everybody behaves in accordance or that the community itself has the skills to engage in accountability, right? So I want us to not assume, right, that magically communities that have different identities are somehow better, right? But that communities that practice these skills absolutely are healthier, right? I think that's the key. Is it showing up in practice or not? Yeah, some more comments in the chat. Have to develop new, sometimes healthier ways of communication because there's less of a roadmap. Yeah, yes to healthy strategies and accountability. Definitely the accountability stuff. High levels of communication. I'm certain I've been lucky. Yeah. Also coming from talking about what's healthy all the time makes it easier to avoid those that need to be avoided. Right. It's also when you're in a smaller community, there's also a lot of vetting that happens. Right. There's people who are like, well, because I mean, at least in my queer world, like everybody has dated everybody, right? Or it's like a degree of separation. So if my friend hasn't, we can find someone who has, right? And so it's like, how's this person, right? And you hear the stories and you hear it from one side and then you hear it from the other side and you're like, that's interesting, right? So you get kind of the fully contextual story. And I think that's, a positive, a benefit, as well as a detriment of, being within a small community. So I realize we're at 12:30. I'm going to encourage you to think about what your next steps will be to make your work more trans inclusive. Hopefully out of, you know, these rooms and this collaborative work, you've come up with some concrete ideas to move forward and thought through some of the challenges that you're all facing. I know we didn't get to talk about every single thing that everybody wanted to talk about, and for that, I say, you know, we have a group of people who want to maybe collaborate in the future, and there's opportunity for us to meet together in different ways. Miranda, any closing comments?
Yeah, thank you so much for today's conversation and for everyone's participation. We, the document that everyone has been completing, we will have that uploaded to our resource library and available for everyone, along with any resources that were linked. We'll have that by the end of today, and I'm gonna send, I'm also going to send you an evaluation, and I know we are surveyed to the nth degree, but if folks could please respond, because that will really help us in making sure that we're hitting the marks that we intended. And I am remiss, I got so excited about starting this conversation, I did not invite my new colleagues to introduce themselves. So I am very sorry about that, but Melody and Kimmy are our new prevention specialists at the partnership, and very grateful to have them here and just down to jump in on everything. So thank you both so much for joining us, and for Liat and everyone who participated. I know I was hearing some really great conversations, and it's wonderful to look through the notes. So I'm excited to look through those further. We will have the recording up very soon, by the 28th at the absolute latest, because I want to make sure we have transcription, so that does take just a moment. But if there are any questions that folks have, please feel free to reach out. I'm putting my email in the chat. And yeah, thank you so much. And this is the start of a conversation. This is very definitely not the end. I love that. All right.
Great to see you all.
All right. Thank you, everybody.